struck me because it reminds me of the wedding service. You know how, and some of you will have noticed this, you've probably been to many, many Book of Common Prayer weddings, but they start with the officiant talking about the reason for marriage, and then there's a declaration of consent, and that's the part where you say, basically, do you really want to do this? if not, this is the time to get out of here. And then it's only later on that you have the actual vows between the people. And the Declaration of Consent was put in place because during certain times of history, people might have kidnapped somebody, and somebody was rich, so some guy would find some really rich young heiress and nab her, bring her to church, and do you really want to do this to him? They would ask, do you want to do this to her? And if she said no, then the whole thing was called off. Or, as you see in various movies, does anybody know any reason why this shouldn't happen? In a way, that's what our Deuteronomy passage is like, I think. It's basically God saying, are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to be in this covenant with me? Do you want to promise to be faithful to me? Do you want to keep the 10 Commandments? Want to listen? It'd be easier not to. This is just before they're heading into the promised land. Do you really want to do this? And everybody says yes, but then they don't. If you see what I mean. And I think many of us had this impression of God, that God was really harsh in the Old Testament, and then sort of got religion in the New Testament, and started to be gentle Jesus, meek and mild. And yet if you look at this passage in Matthew, you don't exactly see that, do you? No, these are hard sayings of Jesus. And one of the things that's really insightful about them is they kind of show us how Jesus relates to the law. So Jesus was well schooled in the 10 Commandments, and all the ins and outs of what we call the Old Testament. He knew those. And in our passage for last week, he said, your righteousness has got to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees and scribes. He says that to his disciples, and here basically he is working out the implications of that. So there's this kind of, you have heard it said, but I say to you. So you have heard it said, you shall not murder, but I say to you, what? What is in here in this gospel passage?
Don't get angry.
No, so if you're angry, you'll be liable to judgment. What else?
Mad.
Mad, yeah, you get mad, that's good, good point. You insult somebody, call somebody a fool. None of us have ever done that, I'm sure. But what is Jesus doing to thou shalt not murder? He's taking it to a whole deeper, inward level. What do you think about that? He says when you're offering your gift at the altar, and you remember somebody that has something against you, there's some kind of a barrier between you, go and get that right before you do anything else. The intensity of this is really something, isn't it? It's very demanding. And then you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, anybody who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's the famous part that Jimmy Carter quoted. And during this time, and actually now that I think about it now, it's just assumed that people will look, particularly men will look at women, and that whole sort of objectifying of a person, making them a sex object. Jesus is saying, you're not supposed to do that. You don't do that. In this new kingdom of love, he's basically saying, you make sure that your relationships with others are good, you don't call people fools, and you don't objectify people for your own ends. I mean, that is really pretty strict stuff. And then finally with this, whoever divorces his wife, you've heard that said. And in the Old Testament, it was, well, let's say that Bob got fed up with Jenny. She didn't come to church today, so he got fed up. So what he would do, he'd say, gosh, that's annoying. He would just write something down that said, I divorce you, signed Bob. Give it to her, and that was it. Notice it did not work the other way. You know, if Patsy was fed up with Dave, too bad. It was only the male who could do that. And what would happen to a woman in that position? Can you guess what would happen to her?
Outcast.
She'd be out on the street.
She has no family left.
Well, no economic.
No way to make money. She would often have the responsibility for the kids. It was just a terribly unfair system. But that was the standard, and that's in the book of Deuteronomy. That's what you do if you want to divorce your wife. Just give her a piece of paper that you load that up. And Jesus says, no. Whoever divorces his wife, and then in Mark's version, it doesn't say on the grounds, except on the grounds of chastity. It just says whoever divorces his wife causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now that's really tough stuff, and the Catholic Church has done some wild and wacky things to try to get around that. But these are the words of Jesus. And personally, I don't think that that means divorce is never good, but there's a sense in which Jesus is saying this covenant, this faithfulness, that's something you are to be aiming for. You are to be doing that. That's the law that I give. So what do you think about this? You know, Jesus says, you have heard it said, but I say to you. You have heard it said, but I say to you. You've heard it said, I say to you. What do you think about what Jesus, those things that Jesus is saying compared to those?
Forgiveness, grace. I love the gospel song. Guy says, I am a weak and weary traveler on this world of woe. But when I get to heaven, I'll be So he basically, so he goes a little too far, excuses all of the terrible things he does, saying he'll be forgiven. So there must be a middle ground, perhaps. But maybe not. Maybe trace that is.
When I look at this, it's like there's this basic human tendency to see what we can get away with. And it's worse in 10-year-olds than it maybe is in adults sometimes. But, you know, Jesus is really saying, no, you know, you really have to change your heart, which is what you said at the very beginning. It's your heart that has to change. We don't just sort of do that. You know, maybe after when we're in heaven by and by. But, yeah. But he's not forgiving us for that tendency per se, but just for
Tendency to wander and not be committed to it.
not letting you off the hook.
That, and these are really hard. Things. Anybody else comparing those? You look like you're thinking something, Ellen.
No, I'm trying to think, but I cannot access it.
I was over here waiting for you.
Oh, were you? I'm sorry.
That's fine, that's fine. I just think that every day we should be mindful and be accountable. And sometimes we bend the rules a little bit one day, and then a week later we bend them some more and some more. So, you know, we're not going to cut off our arms, but it's just every little thing should be serious, or we should take it serious and be accountable.
Yeah, and the scholars do say that cutting off your hand and plucking out your all that stuff was not an unusual rhetorical device at the time. You basically, you're going to shock people. They're going to go, I'm supposed to what? This whole thing about swearing, I was really intrigued to find that at the time it was really common for people to swear, to say, well, like I might say to Beth, I swear on all that is holy. will give you that money tomorrow, or that this thing I'm selling you is really what it is. So it became this kind of way of bargaining, really. It was like campaign promises, perhaps. You know, the kind of things you say and you don't really mean.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, you don't do that. No, that is swearing falsely. So in a way,
That's still part of the Amish code. You don't swear by God.
Yeah, Quakers took this very seriously, so you don't say, when you're in court, you know, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Whereas most people say you save that for only very serious situations, like in court, or say in a wedding where, you know, I swear to, I plight thee my troth, I swear my true following is. So what do you take from this? What do you want to take into your life?
Well, I think it's been a lot harder since the election. And it's interesting how easy it is into demonizing. And, you know, just thinking, well, that person's stupid because they voted for Trump. You know, I mean, it's easy to go up that path. And it's really hard to see any sense in all of this. I mean, it really is. It's all of this sounds great until you really put it into. And I don't think that we've had a sense of how hard that is until right now. It's right in our face. It's right in every day.
And I think it's partly that, these are about the cost, really, of being a disciple, both in Matthew and in Genesis. This is not going to be easy. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's great book, Cost of Discipleship, which he wrote, and then went over to Nazi Germany to minister to the church there. He was put in a concentration camp and killed. So we can see that kind of cost. But at this point, it feels as if we're being called to something pretty radically different. Jesus, what he calls us to here is radical. I think especially the you fool. I think it's been easy for me to think that sometimes about people. You fool. And then Jesus is saying, boy, that's really serious. That's kind of like murder. And you just write somebody off.
Well, that's what I think he's saying, is that we all, I look at people and think, well, they did this and they did that, like murder, blow up an airplane or whatever. But every day we sin because we're not perfect, and it's just as serious. And so and Jesus forgives us, or we're forgiven, but we have to recognize that we're probably as bad as the murderers. It does, you know, that it's sin. We're not perfect. And we can't be perfect. You know?
So keep coming back and asking for forgiveness and the filling of the Spirit. I mean, the Spirit can give us power too.
Well, and social media has given us a whole new venue to practice this.
Do not press the you fool emoji button. Anybody else? What did you take from this? Yeah.
With swearing, and I don't like anybody swearing at all. And my father was a great man. I have a lot of respect for him, but he swears a lot. And one time publicly, I told him that only children and imbeciles swear.
I appreciated that.
Now, if I accidentally hit my finger with a hammer, I swear before I realize I'm doing it. And I think I probably swear in my sleep. Part of me is swearing as well. I'm not conscious of it. So, hard.
And see, I think this kind of swearing they're talking about is really much more about lying and exaggerating than it is about some of those four-letter words that can slip out from time to time. Anybody else? Something you want to take from this?
I've had people swear to me on, God's whatever. But if it's an atheist that's saying that, it has absolutely no value. So you have to watch what's happening too. So.
Well, let's be to write in our hearts that which we should take with us from this passage. As we have chosen to serve you, you said yes to discipleship. Help us to walk that way in humility, in your grace, and in power.